Stay with me, because what happened inside that restaurant changed one millionaire's life forever. The coffee cup slipped from Olivia Carter's hand and shattered across the polished hardwood floor. Conversation stopped. Forks hovered above half-finished meals. Even the soft jazz drifting through the speakers seemed to disappear for a second. Olivia froze beside table 12, her cheeks turning red as fragments of white porcelain scattered beneath the warm glow of the pendant lights. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, kneeling to clean the mess before anyone else could react. Across the dining room, a sharply dressed customer sighed loudly and shook his head. "This place keeps getting worse every year," he muttered. Several nearby guests glanced over. Olivia lowered her eyes and continued gathering the broken pieces. She had heard comments like that before. Long shifts taught people how to smile through embarrassment. But someone else had heard it too. Standing near the kitchen entrance was a middle-aged dishwasher wearing a faded blue apron and a plain baseball cap. Most employees barely noticed him. Customers certainly didn't. To everyone in the building, he looked like another hourly worker trying to get through a Saturday night rush. What nobody knew was that the man washing dishes was Ethan Walker, founder and owner of Walker Hospitality Group, a restaurant empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. For the past 3 weeks, Ethan had been secretly working inside his flagship location. Not as the owner. Not as the millionaire featured in business magazines. Just another employee. He wanted to see what happened when nobody knew who he was. He wanted the truth. And lately, he wasn't sure he liked what he was finding. Ethan watched as Olivia apologized again to the customer. Her voice remained calm, respectful, genuine. The customer finally waved her away and returned to his meal. Most people would have rolled their eyes the second they turned around. Olivia didn't. Instead, she carried the broken dishes to the service station and quietly thanked another server who helped her. Ethan noticed that. He had noticed many things about Olivia Carter. She always arrived early. She stayed late. She treated the busboys, cooks, and hosts with the same kindness she showed guests. And somehow, despite looking exhausted most nights, she never complained. That alone made her different. Then Olivia looked up. Their eyes met across the crowded dining room. For a moment, neither of them moved. Ethan felt an unexpected chill run through him. There was something unusual in her expression. Not surprise. Not curiosity. Recognition. As if she had known him for years. Olivia slowly walked toward the kitchen entrance. Her hands were trembling slightly. Ethan suddenly became aware of his heartbeat. It made no sense. He had never met this woman before. At least, he didn't think he had. The noise of the restaurant faded into the background as she stopped only a few feet away. The warm scent of fresh bread drifted from the kitchen. Glasses clinked. Orders were called. Yet everything seemed distant. Olivia stared directly at him. Then she quietly spoke 3 words. "I remember you." Ethan forgot how to breathe. The words hung in the air between them. Ethan Walker stared at Olivia Carter as if the entire restaurant had suddenly disappeared. The clatter of dishes, the murmur of conversations, the steady rhythm of the kitchen behind him all faded into a distant blur. Olivia seemed just as surprised by what she had said. Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment she looked as though she wanted to explain herself. Then a manager's voice echoed across the dining room. "Olivia, table 16 needs refills." The spell broke instantly. Olivia blinked and stepped back. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I should get back to work." Ethan watched her walk away. Every instinct told him to stop her. To ask questions? To demand answers. But years of business experience had taught him something valuable. People revealed more when they were not being pressured. And right now, Olivia clearly knew something he did not. Ethan returned to the dish station, but his focus was gone. He rinsed plates mechanically while his mind raced. "I remember you." 3 simple words. Yet they carried a weight he could not explain. Ethan had spent decades building one of the most successful restaurant companies in the country. His face had appeared in magazines, interviews, and business conferences. Thousands of people recognized him. But Olivia had not spoken like someone recognizing a public figure. She had spoken like someone remembering a person. Someone from her own life. That difference bothered him. 3 weeks earlier, Ethan had made a decision that shocked his executive team. Instead of reviewing reports from a corner office overlooking downtown Chicago, he had chosen to work anonymously inside his own restaurants. His executives thought it was unnecessary. Some thought it was ridiculous. Ethan ignored them. Numbers could tell him how much money a location earned. Surveys could tell him whether customers were satisfied. But neither could reveal the truth hiding between the lines. Truth lived in break rooms, in kitchens, in conversations employees thought management would never hear. And lately, Ethan had sensed something changing inside his company. Turnover was increasing. Employee satisfaction was falling. Small complaints kept appearing across multiple locations. Nothing alarming on its own. Yet together they formed a pattern. A pattern that made him uneasy. Tonight had only strengthened that feeling. Earlier that evening, he had watched a young busboy struggle to carry an overloaded tray while 2 supervisors laughed instead of helping. An hour later, he noticed a hostess quietly buying dinner for an elderly customer whose credit card had been declined. The company he had built was producing both kindness and indifference under the same roof. Ethan wanted to understand why. His attention returned to Olivia. Throughout the evening he observed her carefully. She moved quickly between tables, balancing trays with practiced efficiency. She smiled at impatient customers, helped overwhelmed coworkers, even offered part of her own meal during break to a dishwasher who had forgotten his lunch. None of it looked performative. None of it seemed calculated. It was simply who she was. That alone intrigued him. But another detail bothered him even more. Every few hours, Olivia glanced toward him. Not constantly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Yet Ethan noticed. Each look carried the same strange familiarity. As if she were solving a puzzle she had already completed years ago. Near closing time, Ethan stepped outside through the rear service entrance. Cool autumn air greeted him. The parking lot stretched beneath rows of yellow lights. Employees were beginning to leave for the night. He leaned against the brick wall and looked up at the dark sky. Then he heard footsteps approaching. Olivia emerged from the back door carrying a worn canvas bag over her shoulder. She stopped when she saw him standing there. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt heavier than it should have. Finally Ethan broke it. "Have we met before?" Olivia looked down for several seconds. When she raised her eyes again, they were filled with an emotion Ethan could not identify. It was not excitement. It was not fear. It felt closer to sadness. "Not exactly," she said softly. "But 15 years ago, on a rainy night, somebody told me your name." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Olivia offered a faint smile. "The strange thing is," she continued, "I never thought I would see you again." Ethan remained silent long after Olivia walked to her aging sedan and disappeared into the darkness beyond the parking lot. The cool night air suddenly felt heavier. 15 years ago. A rainy night. "Somebody told me your name." The words repeated in his mind during the entire drive back to his downtown apartment. He had built companies, negotiated acquisitions worth tens of millions of dollars, and navigated economic downturns that destroyed competitors. Yet 3 sentences from a waitress had unsettled him more than any boardroom crisis. By midnight he stood alone in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago's skyline. Thousands of lights stretched across the city like stars trapped on the ground. Normally the view helped him think. Tonight it only deepened the mystery. Ethan searched his memory again and again. 15 years earlier he had been 27 years old, ambitious, restless, and obsessed with building his first restaurant location. Those years blurred together now. Endless meetings. Endless travel. Endless risks. Faces came and went. Employees. Investors. Customers. Journalists. Yet no matter how hard he tried, Olivia Carter's face did not belong anywhere in those memories. The next morning Ethan arrived at the restaurant before sunrise. The kitchen was quiet except for the low hum of refrigeration units, and the occasional clang of cookware being unpacked for the day. As usual, Olivia arrived early. 15 minutes early, to be exact. Ethan noticed because he was already watching. She entered through the employee entrance carrying the same worn canvas bag. Her uniform was neatly pressed despite obvious signs of age. She greeted the prep cooks by name. Asked about one employee's sick daughter. Helped another carry inventory from the delivery dock without being asked. Ethan watched all of it from a distance. The more he observed Olivia, the less she fit the image of someone chasing attention or recognition. If anything, she seemed determined to avoid it. Around 9 o'clock, Ethan found another clue entirely by accident. He was organizing storage shelves when two servers entered the supply room, unaware he was nearby. "Did you hear about Olivia again?" one asked quietly. "Yeah," the other replied. "3 doubles this week. I do not know how she does it." Ethan paused. "She is still working mornings at the diner too?" "Every day. Then she comes here. Then she goes home and takes care of her grandfather." The first server shook her head. "Most people would have quit by now." Their voices faded as they left. Ethan stood motionless. 3 jobs. Family responsibilities. Long hours. Yet somehow she remained the most positive employee in the building. Something about that fact stayed with him. Later that afternoon another incident caught his attention. A nervous teenage busboy accidentally mixed up 2 large orders during lunch rush. Before the manager could criticize him, Olivia quietly stepped in. She helped correct the mistake, reassured the young employee, and even accepted part of the responsibility herself. The situation ended in minutes. No drama. No embarrassment. Just kindness. Ethan noticed something else. The manager seemed irritated every time Olivia received appreciation from customers. It was subtle. Easy to miss. A tightened jaw. A forced smile. A sharp tone. But Ethan had spent years reading people. Resentment was difficult to hide completely. That evening, shortly before closing, Ethan finally found an opportunity to speak with Olivia alone. She was organizing menus near the hostess stand when he approached. For a few seconds either spoke. Then Olivia smiled politely. "Good evening." Ethan studied her expression. "You still have not explained what you meant yesterday." Olivia lowered her gaze. Her fingers tightened around the menus she was holding. "Some stories take time," she said softly. "And some people need to remember things on their own." Ethan frowned slightly. "You think I forgot something important?" Olivia looked up. Her eyes carried the same strange mixture of warmth and sadness he had noticed before. "No," she replied. "I think you forgot someone." Then she reached into her canvas bag and carefully removed an old photograph with worn edges. She held it for a moment before placing it in Ethan's hand. The second he looked at the image, his heartbeat stopped. Because standing beside a younger version of himself in the photograph was a little girl with bright eyes and a yellow raincoat. Ethan stared at the photograph as the world around him seemed to slow. The restaurant lights reflected off the worn surface of the picture. He recognized himself immediately. He looked younger, thinner, full of the restless determination that had driven him through the early years of building his business. But it was the little girl standing beside him that held his attention. She wore a bright yellow raincoat and a gap-toothed smile. One of her hands was holding a paper cup nearly as large as her arm. The other pointed proudly toward the camera. Ethan felt something stir deep inside his memory. A sensation more than a recollection. A distant echo. Olivia watched him carefully. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally Ethan looked up. "Where did you get this?" Olivia smiled faintly. "My grandfather kept it." Ethan examined the image again. The date stamped in the corner was October 14th, 15 years earlier. Suddenly another detail emerged. Behind them stood a small roadside diner. The sign above the entrance appeared faded but familiar. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. He knew that place. It had been one of the first restaurants he ever considered buying before launching his own company. He remembered visiting the town during a storm while researching locations. He remembered getting stranded there overnight. Small pieces began sliding into place. Not enough to reveal the whole picture. Just enough to make him realize the puzzle was real. "I was there," Ethan whispered. Olivia nodded. "Yes. But why do I not remember meeting you?" Olivia hesitated before answering. "Because you only stayed one night." Her voice carried no accusation. Only quiet honesty. "For you it was a brief stop during a business trip. For me it became one of the most important nights of my childhood." Ethan felt a strange weight settle in his chest. Olivia carefully took the photograph back and slipped it into her bag. "My grandfather told stories about that night for years." Ethan frowned. "Your grandfather knew me?" "A little." Olivia glanced toward the nearly empty dining room. The last customers were leaving. Chairs were being stacked. Closing routines had begun. "His name was Walter Carter." Ethan froze. The name struck him immediately. Walter Carter. An elderly diner owner with silver hair and a slow southern drawl. The memory arrived suddenly and vividly. Ethan could see the man standing behind a counter pouring coffee. He could hear him offering advice to a young entrepreneur who thought success was only about profit margins and expansion plans. Walter had spoken about people, community, responsibility. At the time, Ethan had politely listened while secretly believing business success depended on harder numbers. Yet years later he still remembered those conversations. "Walter," Ethan said softly. "I remember Walter." Olivia smiled. For the first time the sadness in her eyes seemed lighter. "He remembered you too." Ethan looked away. Guilt began creeping into places he could not explain. He remembered Walter. He remembered the diner. Yet he had forgotten the little girl standing beside him in the photograph. Forgotten entirely. "He passed away 3 years ago," Olivia said quietly. Ethan lowered his gaze. "I am sorry. Before he died, he asked me to keep that picture." She touched the edge of her canvas bag. "He always believed you would become successful." Ethan gave a small humorless laugh. "At least he got that part right." Olivia's expression grew serious. "No. That was not the part he cared about." Ethan looked up. "What do you mean?" Olivia folded her arms gently. "He said success would never be a real test." The words landed harder than Ethan expected. Around them, employees continued cleaning and preparing to leave. Yet once again it felt as though the rest of the building had disappeared. Olivia took a slow breath. "My grandfather said that one day you would have more money than you ever imagined." She paused. "But he wondered whether you would still recognize the people who helped you get there." Ethan felt the question settle heavily inside him. Before he could respond, raised voices suddenly echoed from the manager's office near the back hallway. Both Ethan and Olivia turned toward the sound. A young employee hurried past them with tears in her eyes while the restaurant manager stood in the doorway looking furious. Olivia's expression changed instantly. Concern replaced nostalgia. She moved toward the hallway without hesitation. Ethan watched her go. Then he followed. Because for the first time since beginning his undercover experiment, he suspected the real story inside his restaurant was finally about to reveal itself. Olivia reached the hallway just as the young hostess pushed through the employee exit door. The girl could not have been more than 19. Her shoulders trembled as she hurried into the night. Ethan slowed his pace and watched from several feet away. The restaurant manager, Darren Mills, remained standing outside his office with a look of irritation rather than concern. "If she cannot handle pressure, she should find another job," Darren muttered before turning back toward his office. Olivia's jaw tightened. "She has been here less than 3 months," she said. "She is trying her best." Darren shrugged. "Trying does not pay the bills." Then he disappeared into his office and shut the door. Ethan noticed the silence that followed. Several employees nearby immediately lowered their eyes and returned to cleaning. Nobody challenged the manager. Nobody even looked surprised. That detail bothered him more than Darren's comment. It suggested this was normal. Olivia quietly stepped outside. Ethan hesitated only a second before following. The cool evening air wrapped around the nearly empty parking lot. He found Olivia sitting beside the young hostess on a concrete curb near the employee entrance. The hostess was staring at the ground while Olivia spoke softly beside her. Ethan stayed back far enough not to intrude, yet close enough to hear fragments of the conversation. "You made one mistake," Olivia said. "Everybody makes mistakes." The young woman shook her head. "He said I cost the restaurant money. One wrong reservation is not the end of the world." Olivia smiled gently. "Trust me. Tomorrow will feel different." The hostess laughed weakly. "How do you always know what to say?" Olivia looked toward the distant city lights. "Because somebody once said the same things to me when I needed them." The answer seemed simple, yet something about it lingered in Ethan's mind. 20 minutes later the hostess finally left. Olivia remained seated for a moment, staring into the darkness. Ethan approached slowly. "You spend a lot of time helping people." Olivia smiled without looking at him. "Most people are carrying things nobody else can see." Ethan sat beside her. "And who helps you?" For the first time all evening, Olivia did not answer immediately. The silence itself became an answer. Ethan studied her expression. Exhaustion hid behind her calm demeanor. Not physical exhaustion alone. Something deeper. Years of responsibility. Years of sacrifice. "The servers said you work multiple jobs," Ethan said carefully. Olivia laughed softly. "People talk too much. That means it is true." "Yes." She folded her hands together. "The diner in the mornings. Here in the evenings. Bookkeeping from home on weekends." Ethan stared at her. "That is a lot. Life can be expensive." She said it casually, but her eyes revealed something else. Worry. Constant, familiar worry. Ethan remembered the old canvas bag. The worn uniform. The aging car. Suddenly he understood those details differently. They were not signs of carelessness. They were signs of someone stretching every dollar as far as possible. "Your grandfather raised you?" Ethan asked. Olivia nodded. "After my parents passed away." Ethan felt a knot form in his chest. "Walter never mentioned that. He did not like sympathy." Her smile returned briefly. "Neither do I." A cold breeze moved through the parking lot. For a moment neither spoke. Then Olivia looked directly at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "During these past weeks, have you liked what you found here?" The question caught Ethan off guard. "What do you mean?" Olivia tilted her head slightly. "You came here looking for something." "I can tell." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. He had told almost nobody about the purpose of his undercover visit. Yet somehow Olivia had seen through him. "I have found good people," he said honestly. "And some things that concern me." Olivia nodded as though she already knew the answer. Then her expression grew serious. "You have only seen part of it." Ethan frowned. "Part of what?" Olivia looked toward the restaurant building. Several windows still glowed against the night sky. "The people who work hard here are not the problem." Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. "The problem is what has been happening behind closed doors." Ethan's attention sharpened instantly. "What exactly is happening?" Olivia hesitated. The familiar sadness returned to her eyes. "That depends on how much truth you are willing to hear." The question lingered between them as the parking lot fell silent. Ethan studied Olivia carefully. Everything about her suggested sincerity. Yet there was also caution in her voice, as though she had spent a long time deciding whether certain truths were worth speaking aloud. "Start from the beginning," Ethan said quietly. Olivia looked toward the restaurant once more. The glowing windows reflected against the dark pavement like distant lanterns. "The beginning is not what most people think," she replied. Everybody assumes the problem started recently. They did not. Ethan listened. Then when did they start? Olivia folded her arms against the cool air. About 3 years ago. The timeline immediately caught Ethan's attention. 3 years ago was when Walker Hospitality Group expanded rapidly across several states. Growth had accelerated. New managers were promoted. Regional oversight became more complicated. On paper, the company had never looked stronger. What happened? Ethan asked. Olivia hesitated before answering. The culture changed. Ethan frowned. Explain. When I first started here, people helped each other. Managers trained employees. People stayed because they felt valued. Her expression darkened slightly. Then certain people realized they could make numbers look better by cutting corners. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. What kind of corners? Olivia took a slow breath. Schedules became unpredictable. Good employees were overlooked. Complaints disappeared before they reached corporate. Some workers left because they felt invisible. Ethan remained silent. He had heard similar concerns buried inside quarterly reports, but they had always been presented as isolated incidents. Hearing them from someone living through them felt different. More real. And Darren? Ethan asked. Olivia glanced toward the building. Darren is not the cause. Then who is? For the first time, Olivia looked genuinely uncomfortable. That is the problem. She paused. I do not think the people responsible work in this restaurant. Ethan's attention sharpened immediately. You think it goes higher? Olivia nodded slowly. Much higher. The words landed heavily. Ethan had spent weeks investigating individual locations. What if he had been looking in the wrong place? A sudden memory surfaced. 2 months earlier, an internal audit report had arrived on his desk. Several irregularities appeared across multiple locations. Nothing dramatic. Just enough inconsistencies to raise questions. The executive team had assured him everything was under control. At the time, he accepted the explanation. Now he was no longer certain. Olivia stood from the curb. My grandfather used to say something. Ethan looked up. What? When good people become afraid to speak, bad systems become comfortable. Ethan felt the weight of those words immediately. They sounded exactly like something Walter Carter would have said. Olivia smiled faintly. He believed silence was expensive. A cold breeze swept through the parking lot. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed across the city. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Ethan asked the question that had been forming in his mind all evening. Why have you stayed? Olivia blinked. What do you mean? You could have left. Found another restaurant. Another job. Yet you stayed. Olivia looked toward the building again. This time her smile carried a trace of sadness. Because some places are worth fighting for. Ethan followed her gaze. The restaurant stood quiet now. Empty tables waited beneath warm lights. Employees were finishing their final tasks before heading home. This place helped my grandfather keep his diner open during difficult years, Olivia said softly. Your company bought supplies from local businesses when nobody else would. You created opportunities for people who needed them. She looked directly at Ethan. The company I believed in still exists somewhere. I stayed because I hoped somebody would remember that. Ethan felt something shift inside him. For years he had measured success through revenue reports, expansion plans, and shareholder meetings. Yet sitting there beside Olivia, he realized she was describing an entirely different metric. One that never appeared on financial statements. One that Walter Carter had tried to teach him 15 years ago. Then Olivia reached into her canvas bag again. This time she removed a folded envelope. The paper looked old and worn from years of handling. She held it carefully before extending it toward Ethan. My grandfather wanted you to have this someday. Ethan stared at the envelope. Written across the front, in faded blue ink, were 3 words that made his heart stop once again. For Ethan Walker. For several seconds Ethan could only stare at the envelope. The faded handwriting belonged to Walter Carter. He recognized it instantly. 15 years had passed, yet the careful strokes of blue ink looked exactly as he remembered. Olivia said nothing. She simply waited. The parking lot remained quiet except for the distant sound of traffic moving through the city. Finally, Ethan accepted the envelope. The paper felt surprisingly fragile in his hands, as though time itself had settled into its fibers. "He wrote this before he passed away?" Ethan asked. Olivia nodded. "A few months before." Ethan swallowed. "And he wanted me to have it?" "Only when the time was right." Ethan looked down at the envelope again. Something about that answer unsettled him. Walter had written this years after their brief meeting. Years after Ethan had forgotten the little diner. Years after life had carried them in completely different directions. Yet somehow Walter had believed this moment would come. Carefully, Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded letter. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. He unfolded it, and immediately recognized Walter's steady handwriting. "Ethan, if you are reading this, then Olivia finally found you. First, let me say something important. If she chose to give you this letter, then you became the man I hoped you would become." Ethan felt a strange tightness in his chest. He continued reading. 15 years ago, you stopped at my diner during a storm. You probably remember very little about that night. Most travelers did not. But I remember. More importantly, my granddaughter remembers. You spent hours talking about your dreams. You wanted to build something that mattered. You wanted to create opportunities. You wanted to prove yourself. There is nothing wrong with ambition. The world needs ambitious people. But ambition is a dangerous companion when it forgets who helped carry it. Ethan lowered the letter for a moment. The words hit harder than he expected. Olivia remained silent beside him. He continued reading. That night, before you left, you gave Olivia something. I do not mean money. I do not mean business advice. You gave her attention. She was a little girl who had recently lost more than any child should lose. Most adults looked past her. You did not. You sat with her for nearly an hour. You listened to her stories. You treated her like she mattered. For weeks afterward, she talked about nothing else. Ethan blinked. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. A small girl in a yellow raincoat drawing pictures on napkins. Questions about restaurants. Questions about cities. Questions about the future. The memory arrived suddenly and completely. He remembered. Not everything. But enough. I remember, Ethan whispered. Olivia smiled softly. I hoped you would. Ethan returned to the letter. Success is not measured by how many buildings carry your name. It is measured by how many people feel valued because you were here. If your company ever becomes too large for you to recognize the people inside it, then it has already become smaller than you think. Ethan stared at the sentence. The words felt painfully relevant. Almost prophetic. Then he reached the final paragraph. If you are reading this, I suspect Olivia has stayed longer than she should have. She inherited my stubbornness. Listen to her. She sees things other people miss. And if there is trouble inside your company, do not ask what happened. Ask what you stopped noticing. Ethan slowly lowered the letter. Neither spoke immediately. The parking lot felt different now. Smaller somehow. More personal. Walter was gone. Yet his voice seemed present. Clearer than some executives Ethan spoke with every day. Finally, Ethan looked toward Olivia. You knew what was in this letter? Most of it. And you waited all these years? Olivia nodded. Because my grandfather believed timing matters. Ethan folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Then a realization struck him. Walter had not simply left advice. He had left a warning. One that suddenly connected every concern Ethan had uncovered during the past 3 weeks. The employee complaints. The disappearing reports. The fear. The silence. Walter had been right. Ethan had been asking the wrong question all along. Not what happened. What did I stop noticing? and for the first time since beginning his undercover investigation, Ethan knew exactly where he needed to look next. The next morning Ethan arrived before anyone else. The restaurant was still dark when he unlocked the employee entrance and stepped inside. For the first time since beginning his undercover investigation, he was no longer looking for isolated incidents. He was looking for patterns. Walter's letter had changed everything. Ask what you stopped noticing. The words followed him through every hour of the day. By noon, Ethan had quietly gained access to internal scheduling records, employee feedback reports, and management communications connected to the location. What he found was not dramatic enough to make headlines. It was worse. It was systematic. Small adjustments had been made repeatedly over several years. Employee complaints marked as resolved without follow-up. Requests for additional staffing denied despite rising workload. Performance evaluations that rewarded certain managers while ignoring concerns raised by frontline employees. Individually, each decision looked harmless. Together, they painted a different picture. A culture of silence had slowly replaced a culture of support. As the lunch rush began, Ethan continued observing. Now that he knew where to look, the signs appeared everywhere. A line cook worked through his break because nobody had approved relief coverage. A server quietly accepted blame for an error she did not make. New employees avoided asking questions because they feared appearing difficult. None of it violated company policy on paper. Yet all of it violated the spirit of the company Ethan believed he had built. Then he noticed something even more revealing. Every time employees faced a problem, they went to Olivia. Not management. Not supervisors. Olivia. A busboy needed help understanding a schedule change. He asked Olivia. A hostess felt overwhelmed during a rush. She sought out Olivia. A dishwasher worried about caring for an elderly parent while maintaining work hours. Olivia listened. The pattern repeated itself all day. She had become the person employees trusted because they no longer trusted the system around them. That realization stayed with Ethan. Late that afternoon, another piece of the puzzle emerged. While organizing inventory records, Ethan discovered a series of employee recognition nominations submitted over the past 2 years. One name appeared repeatedly. Olivia Carter. Coworkers praised her leadership. Customers mentioned her kindness. Several supervisors even recommended promotions. Yet every recommendation ended the same way. Denied. Ethan reviewed the files twice. Then a third time. The explanations made little sense. Budget concerns. Staffing limitations. Timing considerations. Excuses? Nothing more. As evening approached, Ethan sat alone in a storage office reviewing additional records. His expression darkened with every page. Then he found something that finally connected everything. Multiple locations across different states showed identical management patterns. The same complaints. The same reporting methods. The same decisions. This was no longer a local problem. Someone higher in the organization had created incentives that rewarded short-term numbers while ignoring long-term culture. Walter had been right. Ethan had not lost control of one restaurant. He had stopped paying attention to an entire philosophy spreading through his company. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Olivia stood in the doorway. "You look like somebody carrying the weight of the world," she said. Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe just the weight of several thousand employees." Olivia stepped inside. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Ethan considered the question carefully. "No." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "No? I found something much bigger." For a moment neither spoke. Then Olivia nodded slowly, as though she already understood. "What happens now?" she asked. Ethan closed the final report and looked directly at her. The uncertainty that had followed him for weeks was gone. In its place stood something stronger. Clarity. "Now," he said quietly, "the people responsible get to hear the truth." Olivia studied him for several seconds. Then a small smile appeared. Not because she was surprised, Because she had been waiting for that answer all along. 3 days later, every regional director, executive manager, and senior supervisor connected to Walker Hospitality Group received an urgent meeting invitation. No explanation. No agenda. No warning. The conference room at company headquarters filled quickly. Conversations buzzed across polished tables. Laptops opened. Coffee cups steamed. Most assumed the meeting concerned expansion plans or quarterly performance. Nobody expected what happened next. At precisely 9 o'clock, the doors opened. Ethan Walker entered the room. A wave of surprise moved through the executives. Some had not seen him in person for months. Others smiled confidently, expecting a routine corporate update. Ethan did not smile back. He placed a stack of reports on the conference table and remained standing. The room gradually fell silent. For the past 3 weeks, he began, I have worked inside one of our restaurants under a different identity. Several executives exchanged confused glances. Others shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Ethan continued, I wanted to understand what was happening beyond spreadsheets and presentations. I wanted the truth. The giant screen behind him illuminated. Employee reports appeared. Scheduling records. Internal communications. Turnover statistics. Customer feedback. One by one, the patterns emerged. Not accusations. Facts. Clear. Verifiable. Impossible to dismiss. As the presentation continued, confidence disappeared from several faces around the table. Ethan never raised his voice. He did not need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Somewhere along the way, he said, we became obsessed with measuring performance and forgot to measure people. Nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. Because every chart pointed toward the same conclusion. The company had not failed financially. It had drifted morally. Employees were becoming numbers. Managers were being rewarded for short-term efficiency rather than long-term leadership. The culture Ethan built had slowly been replaced by something colder. Something smaller. When the presentation ended, the room remained silent. Then Ethan made several announcements. New oversight systems. Independent employee reporting channels. Leadership reviews tied to staff well-being. Training reforms. Accountability measures. Not punishment. Correction. A path forward. By the end of the meeting, everyone understood the message. The company would no longer measure success solely through profit. It would measure success through people. Later that afternoon, Ethan returned to the restaurant where everything had started. Employees gathered near the dining room after closing. Most assumed they were attending a routine staff meeting. Darren Mills stood near the front, looking confused. Then Ethan stepped forward. This time there was no disguise. No apron. No baseball cap. Recognition spread through the room instantly. Several employees gasped. Others stared in disbelief. Olivia stood near the back, completely still. Ethan thanked the staff for their hard work. Then he spoke honestly about what he had learned. About the problems. About the changes. About the future. Finally he turned toward Olivia. Every eye in the room followed. A long time ago, Ethan said, someone taught me that success is not about being remembered. It is about remembering others. Olivia lowered her eyes. Ethan smiled. For years, this company benefited from your leadership without giving you the recognition you earned. He paused. That changes today. Applause filled the room. Genuine. Unforced. Employees who had worked beside Olivia for years smiled through tears. Yet what happened next surprised Ethan most. Olivia politely declined every special title he offered. She accepted a new leadership position only after one condition was met. I want opportunities for everyone, she said. Not just for me. Ethan laughed softly. Of course she would say that. Weeks later, as winter settled over the city, Ethan found himself standing alone inside the restaurant after closing. The dining room was quiet. Warm lights reflected across polished tables. Employees had gone home. Customers were gone. The building rested peacefully. Ethan reached into his jacket and unfolded Walter Carter's letter one final time. He read the last paragraph again. Then he smiled. Outside, snow drifted gently beneath the streetlights. Inside, a company had begun finding its way back to itself. And for the first time in years, the richest thing Ethan Walker owned was not his business. It was the lesson he almost forgot.